Hello, everybody. Welcome to the fourth workshop of this GLASS workshop series. We've done 3 already, and we had a lot of enthusiastic participation. So we're really hoping for a lot of active discussions on this one. So our topic today is cyber infrastructure. Matt Huber and I are the co-chair of this workshop. To get us properly framed for the discussions, I like to just start with a few slides, just setting the context and make a few introductions. So I've been using this figure I borrowed from one of the NSF presentations a while ago, and it seemed to be a good tool to convey the context of where cyber infrastructure sits and where various tools and data sit in this world. And this is very simplified. And we're in this research space, we're all dealing with data sources, that's a variety of data sources, and a lot of the data repositories, and also models and tools that come from various disciplines, which are very different in a lot of aspects. And the end goal is really to enable this, many are calling convergence research these days, basically involving very complex data-driven analysis. The characteristics typically are, they're very computation intensive. They need to be integrated and linked in some ways across domains and across scales. And obviously carried out by people using very different tools and systems and vocabularies and so on. And they're distributed, just like this GLASSNET project. The networks are from different parts of the globe. And so GLASSNET used this bridge symbol. There's obviously a gap to go from the resources that we have and to the end result outcomes we wish to come out with. And so this is really a big space. We generally call it CI, and you know, you can look up for definitions in the US. In university research, funding agencies use cyber infrastructure to indicate a set of very broad set of resources, including obviously the high performance computing systems, GPUs, now including cloud computing. And this is sort of the foundation high performance technology, computing technologies. And in the US, there is a national coordinated set of services called Exceed, and it's going to have a follow-up program access. And more recently, of course, there are new technologies. We're looking at even both software composability and hardware composability, meaning that delivering the kind of resources the computation needs on the fly. And some of you have already in touch with containers and coordination services like Kubernetes, and also more of the modern tools like Jupyter, RStudio. And on top of that, you know, there are a variety of tools, including science gateways like MyGeoHub, like HydroShare, and Modred from PIC. And so what's missing there? So that is really what we like to hear from a diverse group of people like the attendees of this workshop. So since I mentioned GeoHub, and you saw GeoHub mentioned in various GLASSNET publications and flyers, I'll just bring it up. It's a geospatial science gateway. It hosts multiple projects, as you can see on the upper left and it hosts tools. On average, we have annual users from 8,000 to 10,000 each year. And you can see that we obviously have a dip during the pandemic. And it's been used for many things. And I want to highlight that, we've been using it for training, like workshops, courses, and even in fellowships where junior researchers can start publishing and sharing their tools and courses online. And so today we're really looking forward to having this discussion about what is the vision for GLASSNET cyber infrastructure. And I'll post these questions in the chat. So these are just some starting questions for people to think about from your perspective, what you like to share with the group while we have a number of presentations. The order of presentations are here. We'll start with Jared and Gerhard from Purdue, Danielle from UF New Hampshire, Nelson from Kansas State, and Haijin from the German Center for Integrative Biodiversity Research. And the workshop will be recorded, and let's see, can I exit this? And from there, so we have an hour, about an hour of presentations. Each speaker will talk for about 10 minutes. And after that, we'll have a discussion. I'll facilitate that, and Tom will help me with that. And with that, I would just like to hand this to Jared, and I'll let speakers introduce themselves, please.
Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity. So can you see my slide? Is everything good there?
Yes.
Good.
Okay, thanks. So CWASI, the Consortium of Universities for Advancement of Hydrologic Science, has been around for about 20 years. In fact, we're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year, our 20th year of incorporation. So there was as we've done that celebration, we've learned a lot about, I've learned a lot about our history. And early on, the consortium was founded, and there was discussion about exactly what our role was going to be. And eventually, one of the key roles that we landed on was as a cyber infrastructure for data archival and discovery. And in fact, CWASI, through some NSF grants, develops a standard that's still used globally. In fact, it's used by the WMO and other organizations for time series water data. CWASI, we adhere to the FAIR agreement where we provide leadership in the Internet of Water. We're members of ESEP. We adhere to schema.org. We've applied for Core Trust Seal recognition and other similar activities. We have two primary technologies that I'll talk about: the HydroClient and HydroShare. HydroShare is the more modern one. HydroClient was the one that was actually developed initially, and the one for which we developed the time series data standard. So 10 or 15 years ago, even more so than even now, researchers spent a lot of time looking for data and reformatting data and so on. And so through the HydroClient, one can discover time series data from a number of providers. We also, through HydroShare, one can publish and share data of any type, and then we provide these tools that Carol was talking about, sort of value-added tools that users can use to operate on our data. So Hydra Client, we host a catalog of metadata from many sources. You can search that catalog via a map interface, and then the data are returned, all of the data are returned in a common format regardless of the source. So for example, you can return NASA data and USGS data and Bureau of Reclamation data all in a common format if you want to search for example, water temperature data. You can also upload and publish your data through the Hydra Client and get a DOI. We currently have a contract to modernize the Hydra Client. It's been in operation for maybe 10 years. And so we think we can streamline it, make it faster, more robust, and provide more capabilities, including the capability to stream sensor data directly into the database and allow users to then operate on those data. So, you can see the numbers at the bottom. We have 100 different services that we provide or that we provide the data for, 5 million time series, 1.4 million different locations globally. So we have both gridded data and point data in the Hydra Client. And so this is the map interface, and this is showing, I believe, soil moisture. Right here, over here on the right, soil moisture data across the United States. The other technology that we have is HydroShare, which is the one that Carol mentioned. And so this is the home page for HydroShare. And so, you can create data, upload the data to HydroShare, describe it, and then share it. The nice thing about HydroShare is that you control access to your data. So for example, if you want to put raw data files into HydroShare and share it with your colleagues only until you've operated on the data, utilized it, even published papers on it, you can do that before you actually make the data public. And so HydroShare is both a data and a model repository. You can operate on your data throughout the data lifecycle. You can obtain DOIs from HydroShare when you're ready to actually publish the data and make the data discoverable. In addition to the primary HydroShare, the U.S. State Department took our code and built another system. It's called Mekong Water, and it's used in the Mekong River Basin to share water data there. The challenge there with Mekong Water is that they have not kept the code up to date. They took the code a couple of years ago, and so it's 2 years old as we've operated on it. We also operate a binational data discovery system for Southern Africa. We're actually building that, and we're building that on our own system, which is how they wanted to operate it. So it's for data sharing across Mozambique and Zimbabwe. So this is kind of what the data page looks like. If you want to discover soil moisture, you type it in, and then everything with soil moisture data comes up here. And then if you want to find the data that actually published, then you can use this filter over on the left. So just a quick glance at the data pages. And then this is actually for a specific site for soil moisture. And so you see up here information about authors and owners and an abstract describing the data. The abstract is part of what's used when one searches HydroShare for different data types. In addition to just your resources or individual resources, HydroShare gives users the opportunity to create groups. And so this is, a set of folks who are working on a particular problem. And so, for example, one of our groups is Mozambique, one of them is Zimbabwe. Then we have groups for other, people who taught classes and so on, and have set up a group in HydroShare. And then a group of groups is known in HydroShare as a community. So here, for example, all of the CZO data are discoverable in HydroShare. And so each of these CZOs is a group, and then we have the national community. Now, as I said, all of the data are in HydroShare, but the data are discoverable in HydroShare, and so we can link out to that. Quasi is also now the hub, or essentially the national office for the new critical zone collaborative network, and we're working with EarthChem to create a data portal to facilitate data sharing across that collaborative network. And so HydroShare is configured to work with third-party apps, Jupyter Notebooks, MATLAB Online for free in case you want to use MATLAB but you don't have a license. We can create pre-configured compute environments for both classroom activities and workshops, which we've done. We recently did one for the USGS for a groundwater modeling course in Brazil. So, we set those up for people who can create reproducible workflows. We also have a gallery of apps for Jupyter and MATLAB and Shiny R and so on. So that's a quick summary. Hopefully it was quick enough, and I look forward to the conversation later on. And I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Jared. It's great to see that you're also going to renovate or update the Hydro client. I remember it from some time back.
Yeah, we call it modernize.
Modernize.
So newer standards, and I would say as we've gone through this with our contractor, it's a bit of a kludgy system with this thing added on here, added on there, and so on. And so I think just modernizing the code will even make it easier to maintain on our end.
Great, thank you. So our next speaker is, let me see, Gerhard, go ahead.
Give me 1 sec, I'm almost there. All right. So, I gotta share my screen first. All right. So good morning. I'd like to give you a brief overview of NanoHub and what we're doing and what it is. It's, I would say, the largest nano user facility with 1.8 million users annually. And the questions that I pursue most recently, most of the times, how do users behave? Can we help them? Can we grow NanoHub? And can we make NanoHub more impactful and sustainable? In the context of this presentation, I was asked to present something on how to measure community engagement and track it. What are the requirements to make a gateway successful? And how do you measure impact on research by others? So really translational enablement. I'll go down these points here in a while. Let me give you a brief overview. So it's a cyber infrastructure that runs 24/7 and has very little downtime. And the core service we offer are apps, nano apps that provide simulation capabilities. And we have about 25,000 users annually. Overall, it's 300,000 users that use the simulation facilities. But we have a factor of 200 more people using tutorials and lectures and courses. So how do we measure research impact? When I started this quite a while ago in 2002, people believed you cannot use somebody else's apps to conduct research. It was a firm belief that this is impossible in the area of nano. And so we started tracking citations to NanoHub, and As of a couple of months ago, we have now 2,500 papers citing NanoHub. Most of those papers are not us, but there are other people. And the first thing my reviewer said, well, can't be good research. So they were so convinced that this is impossible that if it's possible, it can't be good. So we started tracking secondary citations of these papers as well. And if you go by that number, it's the H-index of NanoHub participation in those papers would be 105. And as of 3 years ago, these NanoHub apps are now listed in the Web of Science as proper publications. So we created a new type of publication, which is a kind of a cool thing. And to me, that's a change of perspective. Now, how do we measure impact on education? Here I'm showing you in the center what we call raindrop charts. And the horizontal axis is time in days. And we stack users that behave similarly. And you in the top on the purplish cluster there, you can see there's somewhat rhythmic behavior of a group of people. In the middle, you see stripes of different tools that are being used rhythmically. So we can actually measure classroom sizes, and we can measure which tools are being used in the classes. And we identified over 185 institutions with over 3,800 classes that have changed their curriculum by embedding research applications into their classroom. So the way I look at this is it's really a change of approach and assumptions. We were told you cannot use it for research. We were told you cannot use research tools for education. And we created a new type of publication. To me, those are paradigm shifts. They are really fundamental changes in approach and assumptions. So how do you think about NanoHub? How do I think about NanoHub? I think of it similar to Airbnb or Uber. We have content providers, drivers, hosts that provide material into NanoHub, and we have users that come and use it. And in that sense, NanoHub is really a platform. And if you will, you can argue that it's kind of like any science gateway's dream, which is looking like this, right? Take any science, take any engineering, you conduct research and you change the world, right? That's your goal. And the question is, why is this so hard? Because virtual organizations have been discussed and worked on. The issue is really that there is really a world between what we call research and the real world. And in investment, you call it the valley of death. And really connecting basic research and invention to applied research and innovation is the challenge. So a couple of years ago, I put a stake in the ground and decided to define what are 7 success criteria to make this work. So first of all, you have to have outstanding science. You have to have stuff the world wants. And you have to bring in leveraged funding. NSF by itself or funding agency will not give you enough money to generate all the stuff that you need. So you need to get leverage. The second one is you have to have a commitment to dissemination. And that doesn't sound as straightforward, or sounds straightforward at first, but actually finding faculty members that are actually willing to contribute their stuff for public use was a culture change. And there are reference letters I am no longer requesting from certain people because we had to cut them out. So it is hard to find the right people. Then you have to develop incentives for faculty to participate, and we give them usage statistics, we give them graphs that they can put in their proposals of having outreach that's being impactful. Here's another example of a former postdoc of mine that went to Southern Illinois University at Carbondale, and there was no activity until he went there, and suddenly there's a spike in activity. And he took NanoHub, changed the curriculum, infused it in existing classes, and he actually got early tenure promotion by his work there, and it was attributed to his use of NanoHub and a change in culture there. So then you have to have technology, and it has to be utterly dependable, run all the time, and you have to spend some real money on it. So we built NanoHub, and after a couple of years, we also spun this out in what we call Hub Zero. That is really an infrastructure that can run hubs. You have to have a process to bring technology over from basic research to the applied side. The faculty neither have time nor do they have incentives to actually spend on the apps and then the tutorials and the things that are needed. So you really, what we used to have called dedicated site leads at the various network nodes. And that was significant money being spent. And maybe you can call them consultants, and you would have to call that a significant portion of a budget. And 5, you have to understand what people need, understanding the stakeholders. So you have the geeks on the left that do research, and that's all they really care about. You have users that could somewhat care less about the creation of the tools, and you have the operations piece. And you really have to put them together in this virtual organization and make it work together. Finally, almost finally, you have to have open assessment and incentives, gather, understand, and disseminate stats. So for the longest time, I had a staff member dedicated to actually build pipelines for data gathering, and spend time on this data. And you have assessment folks and communication folks that actually communicate these stories. And finally, you have to have a business model. So for the longest time, we are running based on sustained academic funding in the research model, but we're trying to become self-sustained. So we have to have real product development and real business plans. And we have some ideas for these, and we built some business canvases. We're aiming for an institutional subscription where I can go to the deans or the libraries and have a subscription for non-op service when they use it in the classroom. There's a model for individual subscription, and there's a model also for corporate sponsorship where we can interact with corporations, maybe recruit them to the best performers in NanoHub, and have funding generated that way. So that covers one ground, but the next one is how do we keep track of this? How do we operate in this sustainability model? What we want to do is reduce user churn, get new users, keep the faculty we have because they're multipliers of users, re-engage faculty that went away, recruit new faculty, and ultimately new content contributors and new services. So we have some ideas and strategies. They all evolve around understanding users, building relationships, having touch points. And we kind of did all of this sporadically. And we built up huge data silos of information. We have registration information. I showed you classroom behavior. We have behavior and contributions by contributors. We have citing authors. We have the classrooms, we have the faculty champions, we have lists of universities. So we're sitting on data silos that were completely decoupled. And we have also university rankings, 7 million LinkedIn organizations. So about a year ago, we began to couple all of this together in Salesforce, where all of this data, these data silos are accessible in Salesforce, and I can engage users through campaigns, email campaigns. I can segment groups of users. And I want to show you what you can do with that. So here is an old workshop, 2009, and I showed this slide in a review in 2012. So here's this review held in Chicago. And we measured at the time immediate impact by people using it in their classrooms at their universities. And a couple of years later, I started to look, like literally last site visit, I felt compelled to track some of this and to measure impact. And so I tracked these people down, and it was really tedious handwork. I had to go in the back end of our database, see if they are still active, etc. And the good news, there was quite a lot of people that, those are all the green buttons here, that have been active or were active for a while until they retired. And some of those 3 here, they really didn't interact with the site after the workshop much at all. So this was kind of good news. And so we still engaged 15 individuals, 8 underrepresented minorities, and 10 of them are at MSIs, 2 at community colleges. So I can dig all that out by hand. Now, what I can do is with Salesforce, I can get a much better view of this. So I can actually build report of these participants. I can see what their last active date is in just a simple report. I can see how many years they actually were active. I can find new people that I kind of lost. And I can measure more. I can measure, for example, have they used NanoHub in teaching? Are they participating in classes? Have they run classes themselves? So I can get that. I can check how many tools they used. I can check how many simulation runs they actually did run as a person themselves. I can see if they're contributors now, if they turned into contributors. So these folks are now, some of them, contributors to NanoHub when they participated early on as new folks that didn't even know what NanoHub is. And we call them champions if they have used NanoHub in a classroom. So we can have a flag of those that are now champions. And here I have another label, what kind of ways we engage them in campaigns and email campaigns, etc. So I can kind of get a 360 view of these NanoHub users. So I hope I highlighted some of these items, how to engage a community and what the requirements are. And I would say building NanoHub has been something like jumping off a cliff. And the only thing I would add is that it's not always just a smooth ride. Sometimes you might find surprises and take a crash. So with that, I used more than my 10 minutes. I'm sorry.
Thanks a lot, Gerhard. Some of the slides, I think I just saw it for the first time, and it's I love your top 7 or 6 or 7 things that makes a science gateway successful. I think it's actually quite applicable to a lot of collaborations for a network of networks. I think some of those points are right on, and I like to hear how people react and maybe add to that or adapt to those things for this particular project. Thank you so much. Our next speaker, Danielle. Take it away.
Thank you. Let me share my screen.
We have a guest appearance. I see.
Yes, I've got my assistant here with me. So yeah, we heard some amazing cyber infrastructure talks there. I'm going to come at this from a little bit of the opposite perspective. I'm a researcher who is using these types of resources and trying to identify some of those gaps that Carol talked about at the beginning. So I'm going to talk about bringing models together. One of the big challenges that me and my research group have encountered that really needs cyber infrastructure solutions, and that actually Carol and her research team are helping us solve. So over the past 10 years or so, I think a lot of the research that my group has been engaged in has involved trying to bring 2 or more models together in some way. And so this is a slide we've put together summarizing all the ways that we've tried to put models together. The simplest one is you have one model, model A, and you have some output and you send it over to model B. That tends to be pretty straightforward. And I think a lot of us had done that, and that doesn't tend to need a lot of cyber infrastructure. You might be able to get your model output and put it on a platform like HydroShare and get it out there and easily accessed and understood by model B users. Everything else gets a little more complicated. We find once you have to send that loop back and you're iterating either to go through time or to try to approach some kind of convergence, then we get a need for some cyber infrastructure, largely because if you do offline coupling, as this little cartoon is trying to show, it can actually be a little bit laborious. You know, we've tried all sorts of things, FTP transfers and Globus transfers, and post the data to a repository. And it's partially just slow because it's involving people saying, hey, I put my data there, why don't you go get it? And so what we've been working towards and working with Carol on and some other, actually in multiple projects trying to work towards, is where the cyber infrastructure does that linking between the models for you. And the goal is to not have to customize this for every new project or every new set of models that we want to put together, because there's a lot of characteristics about any kind of model that might be similar to others. I won't talk too much about model A consuming model B, because that's usually a different kind of challenge, but I'd be interested to hear if people have tackled that one as well. Forward. Despite all these different types of modeling couple exercises and all the different models we've tried to bring together, we found there's some really common development steps in the process. And the first one is what we call exploration stage. And this is often the longest, like from our perspective, the longest and most difficult, especially if you're bringing together models from different disciplines. This is where you've got to make sure you're speaking the same language, establish a shared vocabulary, teach each other enough about your model's underlying, theories and paradigms that you can make sure that what you're doing makes sense. And this also might be where you start to establish what your transfer protocol is going to look like. How are you going to bring the two models together from a very technical perspective? And through most of what I've done and what my research team has done, that stage often sort of ends with a lot of the essentially sneaker netting, sending data back and forth in some way, saying, okay, we figure out what we need to pass between the models and when. And that's the end, and maybe we figure it out and can move on to systems analysis, where we actually run the coupled model system. And then eventually you get to operational, where it runs pretty much on its own or smoothly, you're not figuring things out anymore. I'm going to give one specific motivation for an ongoing project that's being run by a group of GLASSNET affiliated researchers. There's so many examples you could bring up for research that requires you to do, multidisciplinary modeling. Our research motivation has to do with groundwater depletion. And really, we have a set of research questions that we realize just can't be answered by any of the single disciplinary models that we have. And so our system that we think we need to model looks like this. And the real challenge, the actual system isn't that important to this talk, but rather part of it is an economic system and part of it's a physical hydrology system. Economic models and physical hydrology models are really different. They come from different paradigms, they run differently. For example, the physical hydrology models tend to be simulation models. We step through time and simulate a particular trajectory. Whereas economic models, especially if you're thinking like a CGE or a partial computal general equilibrium model, they're trying to solve an optimization problem. They have to equilibrate. Those are very different fundamental paradigms. And yet we want to bring those together to try to represent this whole system. And what we realized, we started into this exploration phase, but we had some really unique challenges where we realized we actually need the system to be automated and to have some cyber infrastructure help us do all of this file transferring, because we need to run many iterations of the two models going back and forth to even answer the question, how do we answer this research question? And so we realized, and this is maybe one of the first cases that I've come up against, where the technical solutions actually have to come before some of the research solutions. I was talking about a similar issue the other day, and we came up with the analogy that we're writing the recipe while we're baking the cake. Right? We're figuring out how to do the research while we're doing the research. And I don't think this is that unusual. I'd be really interested to hear if others in this workshop are encountering the same challenge and what type of cyber infrastructure solutions they're coming up with. And I think the questions that come up are really interesting, because we've found that we've actually come up with new sort of research questions that integrate the cyber infrastructure solutions into the research. you know, like what we need to know what time step will work between the two models, given these differences in how they work. Well, we're going to test out a bunch of different time steps, which means, again, we need the cyber infrastructure there to do a lot of iterations. You know, what should our convergence criteria be, considering we have a model that needs to converge to a solution? And other similar questions. I won't go through all of these, but I guess what I want to say is Carol's team has done an amazing job helping us figure out how to do this, because we realize we need to be in this, you know, person kicking back in the easy chair mode, the online coupling mode, in order to actually answer these questions. And the ultimate goal isn't to answer that one question about groundwater, but really we want to build a tool that can be out there on something like the GeoHub, the NanoHub, HydroShare, et cetera, that other people can take and, you know, try to answer their own questions. And so it needs to be a usable tool, right? It needs to run smoothly. I think thinking of those success criteria from Gerhard. And even beyond that, it would be great if the model coupling solution that we develop would work not just for these models, but would be really generalizable for other types of models. So what Carol and her team have been doing is containerizing the models, so putting them into Singularity and Docker containers, and putting them onto, right now, a server at Purdue, but hopefully eventually exceed in a cloud service so that it can be run from anywhere. And that's actually my last slide, because that kind of sums up, I guess, a little bit of the motivation for some of the other talks we're hearing on this cyber infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. I agree with you that this kind of linkage seemed to be at least articulated by a lot of our earlier discussions when we had the data and integration, model integration workshop. And so I'm really looking forward to more discussions and hear people's experience on how they do these things. And I'm sure there are a lot of ideas that eventually that can help us define what would be effective for the GLASSNET project. Okay, we'll move on to our next speaker, Nelson. Take it away.
Yeah, sure. Let me share the screen. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So yeah. Let me move this over here. I'm going to talk about an experience that we had. Carol, Tom, and I work very closely with this, and Christoph Mueller. I don't know if he's in the audience. That was about using cyber infrastructure for bridging at least one gap between climate and social sciences. I'm an economist by training. I'm in the lower part of the slide that Danielle showed. So yeah, I work with equilibrium models where generally we get data. We need outputs from data sets to run our models. So I'm going to talk specifically about climate variables and crop yields. And the origin of this work was an early attempt, GeoSharing, which I was involved, to generate cyber infrastructure and other tools to facilitate interdisciplinary research using geospatial data. And in a sense, this project was conceived as one of those underlying mechanisms that you would eventually need to connect models in the sense that Danielle just envisioned. You needed some ways of translating the data as you pass it from one model to the other. We didn't get that far. We did sort of a part of that. That's what I'm going to narrate. And this was part also of gaps where we were basically creating geospatial building blocks for Hub 0. So sort of a foundational work here. The motivation in this case was basically trying to bridge the gap between expert groups that put their data on silos and sort of when you want to use it from another discipline, it's not always easy. And the difficulties tend to be technical. The software may be expensive, it is commercial. Open source software, it's hard to learn. Hardware needs to be powerful at times. You need to specialize in, getting some knowledge of data formats and whatnot. Codes are very difficult to exchange. Computer code, they generally are written by one user for themselves. And when you need money to open those silos, that's costly, and that money may not be there. And what we were thinking at that time was using Hub Zero, but for basically using the web to share the data, the code, the hardware, and sort of bridge those silos. So the product of that research, so the problem that I was facing, or we were facing at that time, was trying to use climate data, climate variables, temperature, precipitation, and also crop yields. How would the yields of corn and wheat change to 2050 or beyond as the planet gets warmer? Now, it may sound funny for some of you, but even formats as NetCDF may be difficult to handle for economists and our grad students. Downloading those data sets, it could be challenging if you don't have a good internet. Your PC may not be able to store those data. So the question was how to make the data available to users. We got 2 papers out of this, and each paper is a Hub Zero, is a GeoShare tool. They are still working, they are out there. The team were myself, Joshua Elliott, Christoph Mueller, both of them with the Acme project, and then Carol Lang and Jewu at Purdue. So we basically had 2 tools. One was to aggregate global grid crop models, and the other to aggregate the climate data from the CMI P5 archive. So how did we do this? Well, Hub Zero was critical, this technology, where you have dynamic websites, fully open source. That was an important component of this, an important feature. And also the fact that you could with relatively ease to deploy graphical user interface, and very importantly, have some access to good computer resources. The Acme Crop Modeling Initiative, these are crop modeling teams grouped around the Agricultural Model Intercomparison and Improvement Project. They, in their fast track phase, many of these things have changed since we did this, and we're planning an update, but back then they had 5 crop models, and each one of those models was run using data from 5 global climate models under 5 different concentration pathways, with and without CO2, with and without irrigation, for 12 crops from 1971 to 2099. So the combination of these data sets was were more than 35,000 grids and a half degree global grids with crop yields. It's a pretty difficult to handle sort of a database. And what we ended up doing was it's summarized in this graphical user interface, where basically a user, without really needing to do anything other than logging in the GeoHub could select the crop model of interest, the climate model of interest, the RCP, whether they were interested in CO2 fertilization or not, or irrigation, and then the crops, and download the data directly from the servers at the PIK in Germany. So you also had aggregation possibilities. This, again, may sound sort of fundamental for some, but it can be a cumbersome problem for others. So the idea here is that you could upload a region map, basically a shapefile converted using instructions that we have in the papers, and then you could have the aggregation at any level you wanted, county, states, countries. And of course, you could visualize the data. So in this case, we are visualizing data from one of those models. These are corn yields by country. So it's highly aggregated from the 5 minutes grids all the way to the country level. And this can be handled, using Excel in your computer. So we came from this 35,000 grids, very difficult to handle in formats that are foreign for most of our grad students, to something that you can actually open in Microsoft Excel. Very rapid uptake. We were sort of impressed. As of today, I went on the tools yesterday, as it was mentioned. Hub Zero allows to sort of track your impact. There have been 65,000 downloads of yield data and 851 downloads of climate data. So these are from unique users to almost 300 unique users. And I haven't done sort of a formal or a deep citation analysis, but since 2018, the papers have been cited 60 times. Very interestingly, around 10 of those citations are other cyber tools, people that sort of got ideas from here, but most are topical publications using economic models to simulate the impact of climate change. So in a sense, you probably have 50 papers published, and you would say, well, that's not quite a bit, but those are 50 papers that would have not been written if we had not had the tools. Around 5 of those come from my own group here at K-State, and all those papers have been quite impactful too. So it's really a way of bridging disciplines and making other people to use, allowing other people to use data that they couldn't otherwise. The other important feature that we have noticed here through time, it's high institutional use. These things don't get published. These are, the USDA or other institutions that use this data for their policy analysis and whatnot, and they don't get into Google Scholar. And something that Carol and I have deal with for all these years, it's few times per year we get MS and PhD students saying, well, how do we do this? The tool is not working, etc. So we know that there is a certain amount of use for instruction too that doesn't necessarily get reflected in the statistics of our Google Scholar. So this is what I had to share, Carol. I'm going to stop here and give this back to you.
Thank you, Nelson. For the benefit of the attendees, I'll also add that I think this type of work also takes people who sort of sit across these domains, cyber infrastructure and the domain science, and Nelson is definitely one of those who can write code and willing to share and put in time to support these. And I hope to hear more discussions along that line. Our final speaker of this morning is Haijin Kim. Please, Haijin, take it away.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can see my screen and hear me okay.
Yes.
Thank you for inviting me to this workshop. My name is Haejin Kim, and I'm a doctoral researcher at German Center for Integrated Biodiversity Research. And today I wanted to share some of the experiences that I have had with lessons learned and recent developments in biodiversity and ecosystem services from the IPBES and GeoBon experience through the initiatives on model intercomparison BESIM EBV 2020 from GeoBon and the GeoBon SIA collaboration. And I wanted to speak on enhancing the policy relevance for modeling and indicators through framework and data connectivity and cyber infrastructure. So it goes a little bit beyond cyber infrastructure, but I hope it's still relevant for GLASSNET. And I have every detail in the slide, but I may have to go very quickly. So I hope you can also look at the slide later on if you find it useful. So in my PhD, I actually had to work with multiple global scientific and policy frameworks, majorly the Convention on Biological Diversity coming from the biodiversity community, and then the Sustainable Development Goals in terms of finding social and ecological pathways through scenarios and modeling. And I had to make sense of how the IPBES, so the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, assessing the status and trends on biodiversity and ecosystem services and meeting human needs, and various data and modeling framework actually aligns and informs these global frameworks. So I found IPBES as a global synthesis product on ecological systems, and then also there was a parallel development from systems of environmental economic accounting from the United Nations, trying to promote the standardization and global interoperability of natural capital and ecosystem-based data to improve the national statistics and accounting to account for the gross ecosystem product in the GDP and other economic development indicators. And I kind of found the space for GeoBon as essential variables, similarly to climate variables on biodiversity, ecosystems, and ecosystem services, really informing as data products and tools to inform the national accounting systems, especially where the statistics is not enough to inform these systems, and also with a trend and status analysis, and also optimally forecasting information to inform global goals such as CPD and SDGs in planning the way forward. So when you translate that conceptual and analytical framework in the data frameworks, I found that various essential variables components from the global biodiversity framework, global biodiversity communities aligning quite well with the SIA ecosystem accounting framework, with more strength on the biodiversity side, but really informing the ecosystem and ecosystem services accounts given the facets really aligning and mapping well to the framework. So we have a little more detailed framework crosswalk in a publication that's coming forth, but this is like a course level information that I wanted to provide. And when you look at the IPBES assessments and then the CBD policy framework, they really have nature and nature's contributions, people as the central element of their framework. So those data sets can really be used to inform these frameworks. And then I also learned,
somebody please mute your microphone. Thank you.
And then the latest that I've looked at the global, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, these ecological model-based indicators and variables can very well inform the goals beyond oceans and land goals on, water regulation or water quality, human needs met on nutrition, and urban spatial planning for more green cities. So I found real potential for the variables and ecological systems really informing broadly across global goals. And then I also had to look at the data to decision workflows, because sometimes the scientific products stay at the data set or variables level, or they do go as far as the indicators, but they're also not always used in the decision support tools to really inform conservation planning or development decisions. So this is just an example, and using essential biodiversity and ecosystem services variables as an example, but really optimizing the use of various heterogeneous but standardized variables on biodiversity and ecosystem services, you can actually inform on like identifying high biodiversity areas for conservation or critical areas for restoration. And these should ideally be used in various policy tools such as like the CBD planning and reporting, but also ideally going retrospectively on environmental impact assessment. And I am really hoping that through networks such as GLASSNET, we can really find some coherence and workflow coming from models to indicators, but also the indicators that are being used across different policy tools, so that some more rigorous evidence is informing conservation decisions and also sustainable development pathways. So this is just one example that we did zooming in on the CBD Global Biodiversity Framework. And one point to make is that we really want to close the information loop, seeing how the interventions are really impacting the state of nature and benefits to people, but also bringing that information back to making decisions on the interventions for the future, if our interventions have really improved different goals on nature and benefiting people. And another point to make is that I think there is a real benefit of using the global frameworks to standardize data and better use models to inform policies, but we really also need to go bottom up in terms of bringing forth national data and models and capacities that exist in the countries to really make this data more interoperable and build capacity for decision making. And as part of my PhD, I also had to make sense of how the scenarios and models fit in with all of these global scientific and policy frameworks. And in the project that I am doing in my PhD, the IPES community is developing new scenarios and modeling framework, trying to diversify the values and benefits of nature and bringing that at the center of the decision-making process. And this is one study, recent study published in Science using that framework. So optimizing the priority of protecting land using actually multiple value perspectives on nature. So not only on conserving nature for nature's sake, but also how that benefits people or provides needs for people. And in addition, really seeing how the cultural or mutual benefit that nature and people co-create can also be conserved, and that can be counted in prioritization of land use. And this is another example on the marine side, and this is another recent article published in Nature, using the co-benefits for nature, both nature and people, using metrics on biodiversity conservation, carbon stocks, and food provisioning to see where to place marine protected area meeting more than one goals or aspirations. Finally, I wanted to share the latest advancement from the GeoBond network on the Cyberinfrastructure. And GeoBond network has been developing this EVV data portal to make the ecological data and model-based data variables accessible for a wide range of users. And as of the latest, we are implementing the NetCDF system as previously presented, enabling the data package across time, space, species, or ecosystem types, and also scenarios dimension captured in a package instead of having to download and upload multiple hundreds and thousands of GeoTIFF files for easier data analysis across time. So we are making increasingly more data sets available on the GeoBond data portal. So you can actually find data with metadata and contact for data developers also for further use or derivation of indicators or analysis for your own use. And finally, I wanted to share on the latest collaboration between GeoBond and Microsoft on the EBBs on the cloud. So it's really optimizing the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence and cloud-based computing to derive EBBs, harvesting multiple sources, and ultimately to inform decisions on conservation and sustainable development. There are 5 projects that was funded last year, and I think we will see some results in a few years down the road. And I left the links for you to read a little bit more about each project that was funded. And I think this is like one big step forward in making data more interoperable and connectable. And hopefully this will also extend to model-based scenarios analysis and so on moving forward. So I had a few suggestions for the GLASSNET summarizing, and I really hope that GLASSNET could consider policy context and needs from indicators, lens, and data workflow, connecting all the way to the global governance frameworks and national statistics so that they can really be used in decision support. And obviously linking biodiversity, ecosystems, and ecosystem services, eventually thereby getting at human well-being and quality of life so that we can really underpin ecological modeling central to sustainable development pathways. And I think it's critically important that we make data models, indicators, workflow transparent so that users can easily access information and have more credibility over them. And really using scenarios as a transformative tool for decision making, because we can create narratives with more compelling stories to inform decisions for a sustainable future. And I think we have to continuously apply global frameworks with local frameworks and data so that we can improve that interoperability and standardization, because there's quite some differences between different scales of frameworks. And then we improve the rigor of predictive models with observation and empirical data through validation and calibration. And finally, connect initiatives such as GLASSNET and SIA Aries, which tries to bring model-based data sets more usable for decision makers, and an EBB data portal that I presented coming from scientific networks. With that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Haijin. I am really looking forward to learning more about GeoBond and the other cyber infrastructure that you mentioned. And there seemed to be a lot of potential, at least for my group's work, for example, connecting to the data. So really looking forward to learning more about that. So that concludes the first part of the workshop today with our presenters, and many thanks to each of the presenters. Thank you very much for the thoughtful and questions you posed. Let me ask Tom and Brittany, do we have a short break in between, or should we just launch right into?
Let's launch right in, Carol, and maybe first, you could first give the panelists a chance to react if they like. I was struck, I'll make a few, just a couple of comments here while they're reflecting. I thought Danielle Grogan's presentation was kind of emblematic of what we're trying to achieve here. There's the hydrological network, an economic network, and using the GeoHub to bring together models from these different networks. It's a huge challenge. And I think I'm very excited about that potential for containerization. Nelson Valoria's presentation highlighted the kind of the disconnect between often the spatial resolution or the kind of data that the different communities need, and the value in being able to make that translation. I thought Jared Bales really highlighted the sophistication within one of these communities, the hydrological one, and the data handling and accessibility. And the NanoHub obviously highlights the capacity for simulation tools and models to really spread. That's within one community. So we're trying, in a way, we're trying to assemble all of these, and HyGen's data integration challenges in the biodiversity area are huge, but I see great potential there in that example that Danielle presented of being able to, in a sense, put into a container the knowledge and the expertise of one of these communities, communicate it to another container, and iterate back and forth. I mean, I think that's what GLASSNET is about. It's a network of networks trying to tie together these different communities, trying to encourage them to work together and find the common vocabulary and so on that HyGen was talking about. But I thought it was very interesting to hear these different presentations.
So as Tom suggested, we can go around with the panelists and see if you would like to say a few words about your reaction to these other presentations or to the questions I posed earlier. I'll put the questions in the chat box too. Who'd like to go first? I'm going to call names. Jared, would you like to go?
Of course. Thank you. So, I was really struck by Gerhard's presentation. NSF asks us all the time for metrics about our usage, and we're able to supply those at a reasonably granular level. But they also ask us about our sustainability plan or our business model. And, at some level, that's a fair question, but at another level, I wish NSF would think about that a little bit themselves as they set up these various data centers or data hubs or whatever, across the various disciplines. But that's a real question for us. My NSF program officer used to tell me no money is forever. And so I take that seriously as we think about the future and hopefully the next 20 years. We are, this idea of coupling models, we are building, containers for people to use. Quasi supports a 7-week summer residential program at the National Water Center. Normally it's residential. And they have to get spun up and operating quickly. And so this summer, we were able to containerize some very complicated models that they were able to run on the Google Cloud, complicated coastal storm surge models coupled with upland freshwater runoff models. And so we think about that a lot in our community. The other thing we think about is kind of these massive 4-dimensional data sets. And so, yeah, NetCDF works, but and we use that, but we're thinking about cloud optimized data solutions, and we've worked some with Pangeo and others on trying to build something that will serve our community when they build these global climate models or even CONUS level hydrologic models. So that's certainly something we're continuing to push.
Thank you, Jared.
I can jump in because I have some responses to what Jared said. It's great to hear that you guys are also working on containerizing some of the models. I think I'm hearing this from different groups, and it seems like we're sort of converging on a way to do this. That this is being effective and the tools are being built for containers, which is great. I'm also glad you brought up this idea of dealing with the very large data sets. One of the, I think, funnier ways that we actually ended up transferring data between models once was quite literally sneaker netting it. What we needed to transfer upwards of 8 terabytes of data from one model to another, and got really frustrated with different file transfer protocols not consistently working over and over again. And so finally we realized that 2 of us lived really close together and just met and handed off a hard drive. And we thought this is the lowest tech solution to this, and it worked. But what does that say about our cyber infrastructure and where we need to push the boundaries? But my other thought after seeing all these presentations, I think, is as a model user and not someone building the cyber infrastructure, is sort of a question to put out there. There's some amazing tools, that we heard about today. And I'm thinking, wow, I really want to use all of those. But at the same time, it's really important to be a contributor and to bring up these issues like huge data transfer. And I just wonder, as we think about training, especially sort of training our students and postdocs, what's the balance between training them how to be the users of these tools versus training them to be the contributors? I think I'll just maybe leave that out there for others to respond to.
Thank you, Danielle, for posing that question. I have my own response, but I'll let others to respond first. Go ahead, Gerhard.
I have a suggestion. I mean, I presume most of us are at universities and are teaching courses. Integrate your own stuff or the things you use, your usage scenarios, into your classrooms in some shape or form. It doesn't have to be the full-fledged new run. Shouldn't be just the exploration of your data that you finally got, but the process. So what I did this semester, well, last semester I added a project to my semiconductor class where it was optional credit to design a quantum dot detector. This year I went further. I actually stopped having these stupid midterms that just check again whether they did their homework themselves and some stupid analytical solutions that are literally 40 years old, and that's what's being taught in semiconductors, to having 2 projects to design a quantum dot and to design a nanowire. And they use tools on nanowire. And they can be creative, they can use the tools, they can drive the tools in the ground and make it an experience rather than regurgitating yet another analytical solution to something. I think if you're a faculty at a university, that answers the training piece, or hold workshops, involve other faculty, train them on how to use these things, and then keep track of it. I mean, it's up to the advanced users to be the prophets that go out and do it. You cannot assume that it's the cyber infrastructure operator doing it.
Matt?
I have a comment if I could.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think Danielle made a great point, and I also agree with Gerhard. I mean, this is a tension that I always have with making things, building tools that make things easy for people to use, is we may be simultaneously making it so that people, our graduate students and the people who come after them, don't have the basic skills that they need as they move ahead. So we somehow have to train them with how to access NetCDF and 100 terabytes worth of data, and then turn it into an Excel spreadsheet in this process. And we have to train them with all of the skills, including, scalable methods and open methods. And but maybe part of that training is to develop tools that hide all of that to the end user. So, I mean, I guess to my mind, that's how I do the balance, is as being at a university, training my students to be able to do all these more sophisticated things, but then deliver as a product something that an unsophisticated user can just use. And as long as we do both at the same time, that maybe in the long term, we have a sustainable enterprise.
I'll add my 2 cents to this discussion. I really appreciate this question. I think it's something that comes up all the time for us as cyber infrastructure developers, that you always, it always works much better if you work with people who sort of stand across both cyber infrastructure and domain science, as I mentioned earlier, that you like Matt said, you don't want to always just put out tools that people can push a button. You do need people to sort of sit in between and translating things from one world to next. And so I do like at least one of the programs NSF has been supporting, and Matt and I are on the same project called Cyber Training. So we train people to use cyber tools, these advanced tools, but at the same time, we also show them how they can be a contributor, in such as putting their courses or tools online. And so we walk them through the process. Fortunately, one of the platforms we're working with is HubZero, and it has an established process for putting a tool online without having to be an expert of web developers. So there is that division where you are essentially a technology developer, or you're more of a higher level sort of value added science user. But I do see the need for training people who can bridge both worlds.
So speaking for us, one of the things that we do to try to grow our community and grow our metrics so that we can, demonstrate our value is we have a lot of training for students and faculty on our tools. And so the more people that are trained, the more users we have, and the better our metrics are. And we do this through training courses. Quasi sponsors something called the Virtual University, which is modules taught by different faculty, across the country. Through our Summer Institute, we also have a Hydroinformatics Fellowship, which actually the proposals are open, call for proposals is open now, but in that fellowship, we give students cash to develop an app that can be hosted on HydroShare and used by the community. And so, we've been around 20 years, and there are people now who are in faculty positions who have never not known a Quasi. And so, we're happy about that, but we also want to continue to increase adoption. And we think training is one of the best ways to do that.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Now I'm going to maybe switch the focus a little bit. So among the questions we're asking, one of them is, what do you feel is missing in the current cyber infrastructure? So I'll start by asking.
Carol, can I insert one thing before you?
Real quick.
Switch? Yeah. So I somewhat disagree with your statement that you made that that you don't just want to have users who are end users. You really need to have a value system for contributors to want to maintain their codes or to put codes in. And it's a lot of work. And I mean, even if you make it as easy as you can, at the end, it's a lot of work. I spent literally the last 12 days, I went into hiding and updated my tool on NanoHub to use it in my class. Not everybody is willing or able to do that, right? But then at the end, I do think about an end user that does not need to know what Nemo 5 is and what the input decks are, how it's run, etc. Right? So you need to bring in both people, but chances are my personal use of Nemo, the software that we wrote in my group, is very different from what I usually provide for others in the NanoHub. I'm writing advanced research papers on the last little twitch on quantum dots or nanowires. That's not what that tool is ultimately doing. So we have to distinguish the value systems.
Point taken.
May I
Thank you.
also add a few thoughts?
Sure. Go ahead.
So I feel like maybe we could, and I'm sure there is for GLASSNET, to have some questions that we want to collectively address, whether it's against the SDG frameworks or goals at the global level, and then having that applied at the national scale and other scales. But having some core questions that we collectively want to address, linking different domains of models, and then developing some generic modeling framework where each of our hydrological modeling or ecological modeling, see how we map to that framework, responding to very complex questions that we need to address to inform decisions a little bit better. And then and if we have something a little bit flexible to modify and continuously improve with new models and technologies, I'm kind of seeing we don't really have a global infrastructure where people are trained using more global framework with different training components. But I feel like maybe GLASSNET has that potential to, also through these universities that's been reached, that you train students using the similar framework, and also train the students to use the similar models, or but I feel like maybe we need some sort of questions that we are responding to, and then like a broader generic modeling framework that we can bridge our different communities.
Thank you, Haijin. I think that's a really good segue to maybe for us to flesh out more on what's missing today. Karsten had his hand up, virtually up for a while, so I'm gonna give the floor to him now. Go ahead.
Thanks. Sorry. Thanks a lot. Thanks also to all the speakers. This was really cool and inspiring. So I can just.
Ça montrait bien ton rideau aussi.
Somebody please mute your mic.
Thanks. So I can just comment on a couple of thoughts that came up during earlier similar discussions on cyber infrastructure, both in LuckyNet and also in GeoBon. And I think they will speak to some of the things also that Gerhard just mentioned. So in terms of things that are currently missing, at least missing in that combination, there would, for example, be that an infrastructure that can host massive and at the same time diverse standard data types. So not just environmentally gridded information, or just socioeconomic vector data, or just biological point data, but all of these, but at the same time have some option for ongoing community-driven curation. Because as soon as some climate data are on some other platform and the climate folks don't look at those anymore, eventually they become less and less good, and then they're also no longer of use to the socioeconomic and biodiversity models. Then such infrastructure should, in addition, be able to host potentially large volumes of data that are uploaded by users, including data that maybe for legal reasons cannot be shared openly at this point. Otherwise, you completely lose certain user communities that work maybe with cadastral data or certain other data types. And then these data need to sit close to powerful and freely, or at least cheaply accessible computing resources, so that there's no need to move large data volumes between platforms and computers, then these hosted data should be able to be analyzed via diverse combinations of programming languages, so that ideally almost all the projects, data development, data analysis, and data management workflows can take place in one place without too much need to translate code. Then projects need to be developed and accessed by collaborators from very different countries and institutions worldwide, without relying on any specific sort of bilateral collaborative agreement or specific institutional library subscriptions or so. Then the hosted data need to be dynamic. I'm almost finished, don't worry. Meaning that sources, they should be periodically updated from their sources, and users should ideally in parallel be able to choose data that reflect the latest available data to create, say, the most accurate or highest quality product, but also to refer to earlier data versions for continued comparability with historical assessments. The platform should be able to host periodically running routines, which can be about data development, data application, or data management. So basically workflows that allow easily updating complex applications without the need to finance a whole new project. And then finally, and this speaks to Gerhard's point, the platform needs to acknowledge that the extent to which different users wish to engage with the different workflows and input data sets differ. Some are dependent on regularly running analyses that maybe feed into some policy process. And these users might be happy with large parts of their analyses being a black box. They may not even personally have the training or the resources to dig any deeper. But on the other end of the spectrum, there are developers who require complete openness and transparency and the ability to basically interfere with each and every component. So this breadth of black box to complete anarchy is also something that's currently missing. Sorry for taking so long.
Thank you. I would say that's a big ask. I want to hear people's reaction.
My gut reaction is big consolidated platforms rarely get uptake or are sustainable. So, you know, most of the successful projects that were around 4 years ago are not the successful large data efforts today. So somehow you have to do it in a way that it's agile and self-sustaining. That's my feeling.
And I would agree. I don't think it's mutually exclusive, though.
Yeah, I agree. I see the value of everything you're saying, and then
I disagree. Yeah. And I disagree because I've seen too many good hubs that are based on decent hub technology just demise. And some of them we absorbed a nano hub, like the originator of a thermal hub wanted to have his own hub. There's just not any critical mass in these small communities. And unless you have a killer app value that people are willing to spend $10,000 of their grant to keep this alive each year, so you can come up with, say, $1 million a year over 100 groups, you're not going to sustain that. Just thinking that you're going to hobble along on some existing hub is not going to work.
Well, so Gerhard, I mean, I'm going to sound schizophrenic here, and I apologize, but just so you know, in climate change, we're talking about major international investments on the order of $1 billion a year for cyber infrastructure.
Great.
So
and those are sustainable, right? And those are not
For one election cycle, they are sustainable.
Oh, yeah. But fair enough. But the point is, you hopefully build something up that has is not so crazy diverse that you have hundreds of those sites, and at the end you have 2 survive, right? To me, it would be detrimental to not bring things together and have a couple of skunk works and they try out what's best. But at the end, to be sustainable, you have to serve a large number of users that are willing to pay in some shape or form. Doesn't have to be cash, right? It has to be participation, contributions, usage, documented usage, impact, all those kind of things. All of those are in a sense payment forms. It can't be just a few research groups themselves.
So I'll just comment on that a little bit. I get it. You need to create value. You need to build things that people want to use to in order to keep it sustainable, having the people stay engaged. That is probably the hardest thing, right? To identify that, to know what people need. And I think one perhaps advantage of GLASSNET is that it has a core group of networks that has followings already. And so one strategy I was thinking that may work much better than building something from ground up is to try to connect these pieces. And as people connect with each other through